Emmanuel here on economics, and I've got questions. Now, we're looking at the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership, a vehicle for trade negotiations between the United States and Kenya. Now, the United States and Kenya are carrying out these negotiations for many reasons, among them, most importantly, that Kenya no longer qualifies to receive trade concessions as a poorer country, right? The per capita income has risen to such a level that it no longer qualifies for that. Now, that means that Kenya has to go out and look for new trade agreements with many of the wealthier countries, the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, just to name a few regional blocs and countries, right? Now, in part one, I looked at digital trade, and I talked a bit about food security, and the other item, corruption, right? Now, on this part, I want to talk about the last remaining negotiation points. Now, the first one here is environment and climate change action. Now, the negotiation points are very familiar to those who follow the climate change debate even lightly, right? Concern on, say, the American side that say Kenya should show more willingness and actually increase its compliance with global standards in response to climate change, right? These are the same goals that are in the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Now, we can differentiate between climate change and the environment, right? They're intertwined issues, but that are very, there's a bit of nuance. Now, what I understand is there are best practices to prevent environmental damage. Say, how do you treat rivers? What do you dump in them? What shouldn't you dump in the rivers? Just to name one example. Another example, you could talk about the air, pollution, right? Something that straddles both the environment in the immediate sense and climate change as a whole. Now, in all, what I might emphasize here is that the debate must continue and it must be enriched, right? Perhaps, poorer countries that are trying to increase their manufacturing output and who are sure to pollute in this endeavor. Perhaps the only path for them, to basically begin to engage into induce the process of structural transformation, they might need to pollute a little bit. And so it's the only path to get wealthier. If we're talking about an issue like, say, food security, you can't achieve a persistent food security if you remain poor. So this is a debate that I think should continue to be waged, and many different arguments should be heard and should be elevated, because, well, it's been shown that if you have an economic surplus, right, you actually can turn around, and nations do turn around and invest some of that surplus in now environmental damage and climate change mitigation, right? Japan and South Korea are two examples. First, you had to get dirty, because you had to produce things, use the wealth that you generated from producing those things, then come back and kind of improve the environment a bit, the environment that you damaged in your endeavor to grow. Same with the climate. Now, it's very difficult to ask an individual who can barely pay for, say, the food in his household or the school fees for his children to study. It's very difficult to ask him to think about buying a Tesla in order for him to take care of the environment, right? And this is basically, at least as I understand it, right? Look, I got questions. I'm ready to learn, but this is the profile of the debate as I see it. Now, another point of negotiation here is good regulatory practices, standards, collaboration, trade facilitation, and customs procedures. Now, the Americans would like to see improvement in the institutions directly related to trade, right? And trade facilitation. Now, this is a very good point. In general, what we have seen is that when countries with weaker institutions engage with countries that have stronger institutions, whether it's interface through trade or political integration, whatever it is, right? That you actually can see an improvement in the effectiveness, the functionality of institutions. You do see a co-evolution in institutions, right? The institutions of the poor country actually can tend to improve. This would be a very, very good thing, both for Kenya and actually the East African community, because you could begin to see that advancements in functionality of these institutions actually bleeds right into the functionality of institutions in the regional economic community. Another point of negotiation here is micro, small, and medium enterprises, right? Kenya and the United States have both committed to promoting small firms. This is a very good thing. I mean, first for the fact that very few firms in Kenya are large. You know, Safaricom and KBL are the most important taxpayers in the country. And so the STIP will pursue technical exchanges of best practices in the integration of small and medium enterprise in international trade. What one might warn is that perhaps this shouldn't be another policy objective that's pursued because it's trendy, you know, to support small business, small medium enterprises. At the same time, however, and of course, even I personally would like to understand a little bit more and see what other examples have existed of similar policies. What have they, how have they helped these small and medium enterprises to engage in global trade, right? To enter the global value chain. So this is one area even I will be watching and trying to examine more keenly. Now, finally, supporting participation of women, youth, and others in trade. You know, one report by Crown Trust, an NGO, right, asserts that women in Kenya contribute almost 50% to the Kenyan GDP. Very significant. Another statistic, you know, related to trade and women, you know, 60% of women in Kenyan jails are actually locked up on charges related to the manufacture of informal brew. Right, 60%. It's very large, very significant. Now, what could happen in terms of supporting, and why is even that statistic I just mentioned important? Now, these women are entrepreneurs, just like, say, KBL, for example, right? Engaging in business and commerce. Of course, facilitating their trade will involve some change even in law enforcement, in the way that we perceive trade, this particular market. But essentially, these women entrepreneurs who are making this brew there's a demand for their brew. Their brew is probably, you know, it's at a lower price point. It's at price points that have a specific market. And what you're essentially saying by clamping down on this trade is that some people shouldn't have fun. You know, Johnny Walker is okay, but the local brew is not. You know, is the Moratinas and etc. Right now, I would have some issues with such a policy, because it's discriminating against one group in their specific trade in which they ply. Actually, changing the approach of law enforcement here, and then even directing support towards these women, could actually would be a veritable boost to women in trade. Additionally, there is a new phenomenon called women-based, is it gender-based budgeting, where you actually can look at the state budget and techniques that both highlight where it fails to account for gender differences, and actually propose ways that the budget could reflect gender concerns. So the United States could actually respond to this negotiation area of supporting women in trade by supporting gender-based budgeting initiatives that already do exist. And that is all. Look, at the end of the day, we are trying to learn, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to stay with asking questions. This is Emmanuel. I got questions. Cheers.